Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Here you are again, or here we all are again, Jacqui and Michael. We are up to chapter 6 of the Bhagavad Gita, and I have a feeling this is going to be one of my absolute favorite chapters in the whole entire book. Well, meditation. Michael, I'm going to hand it over to you for a more thorough explanation of what we're in for, but yes, please do explain.
Well, I'm glad to, hello, Jacqui, and hello to all of our listeners. I'm glad to hear that enthusiasm about this chapter on meditation, because it's a very important one. I mean, every chapter, is an important chapter. The whole book's vitally important in our lives and the changes we're making in them. But this one is sort of stands alone in one sense. And so the fact that you're so enthusiastic about it, Jacqui, means I'm going to invite you, after I make these introductory comments, to co-host or co-share this podcast with me on meditation. All right.
Excellent, excellent. Well, it's a topic dear to my heart, and I love teaching people and practicing, and I think it's of a lot of use to a lot of people. So
Good. Well, we're certainly on the same page. Not that we haven't ever been, but very strongly by the sense of it on this one. So today's 13th podcast starts us on chapter 6, titled "The Yoga of Meditation." So the whole chapter's in my book at 60 pages. So it's very detailed material. So I'm just going to quickly sort of lead into chapter 6, Jacqui, by referring to the previous chapters. So the preceding 5 chapters have all helped us get this far. In chapter 1, we realised we're at a crossroad or turning point in our life, requiring courage to fight this battle, which deep within we eventually more and more realising was the battle for our own soul. In chapter 2, saw us start to gain a new true knowledge. A lot of work there on the new knowledge, wasn't it, Jacqui? Which in chapter 3 led us to Karma Yoga, the rightful action. So the knowledge taught us how to act in a truthful, right manner, which made us then wiser. That was a chapter on chapter 4. So in chapter 4, we combined truthful knowledge with right action, which made us wiser beings. Then in chapter 5, we started to use a combination of courage, the knowledge, the action, and the wisdom, which we'd accumulated one by one after the other, to guide us in renunciation of action. That was our last podcast on renunciation. And so now in chapter 6, having mastered to some degree or other the previous chapters, we are well enough equipped to tackle the next stage of our spiritual journey, which is the practice of meditation or self-control. So we're now equipped with those different aspects to have greater control over our lives. That means from a higher self, not from the egoic self. So we're breaking free of the egoic self having control of our lives to our higher self having control of our lives. So that's that reference to the passing of the reins in the chariot from Arjuna to Krishna, which is the Buddhi, Krishna, the egoic being. And you shared a story with a friend of yours, and she's making some very fundamental changes in her life at the moment, regards deciding not to buy any very expensive property, which would have an enormous mortgage, and settling more realistically for a manageable priced property. So well done to her, because this is the example and the proof of what I've just outlined there in summary. So I thought today, Jacqui, that in today's podcast, we might do it a little bit differently. I've got some material I've put together on meditation over many years to take to cafe sessions or the study groups and so on. And I know you've got some practical understanding in this area as well. You've been on many retreats and practiced meditation and so on. So I thought we could pool our knowledge and jointly present today's podcast. I would imagine some, if not all, of our listeners are either practicing meditation or have got at least some basic knowledge or understanding of it to some degree or other. So what say you, Jacqui? Will we proceed along those lines?
100%. Goodness, there's so much for us to talk about.
a joint podcast, a joint father-daughter podcast, folk.
Well, I feel
Never,
like we have been doing joint all along, but
yes, more joint.
perhaps you just know I've got more to comment on in this regard.
This is like the Siamese twins almost. Never been done in history, folk. First time. Old man and a young daughter, and they're both vitally interested in meditation. So let's begin, Jacqui. I'll sort of read through bits of my material, and then you come in at any stage you want to comment or add any points to it. All right?
Sure.
So I'll simply start off with the question, what is meditation? And it's simply a control or stillness over the body, the emotions, the mind, and the ego. It's a deep relaxation technique. So through meditation, we still those four major potential eruption type volcano aspects in our life. The physical, emotional, mental, and all ruled by the ego. And so it's to tame them, firstly, but also that by doing that, we become more relaxed. So they're things that I'm sure, 100% sure, every person on the planet, if you put it to them like that, would say, yep, I'll have a bit of that. But they haven't got the background knowledge. They don't know much about it, so they don't avail themselves of it. So this is now an area that I'll expand on, and I'm sure you'll come in here somewhere. So I ask, what's the purpose of meditation? The purpose. Well, there's two purposes, just like we're saying in these teachings, Jacqui, that the results of the teachings are instant for anyone. But there's also long-term aims of the teaching to eventually end in self-realization. So meditation has got that same sort of two-quality aspect, if you like. So I'll start off with the end purpose of meditation, if you like, which is simply to connect or communicate with God. Now, I've got God in inverted commas, meaning the higher self that you know, consciousness itself, or the awareness, or the Supreme Being, whatever reference people want to put on it. I don't have any issues with that, as long as they understand what I'm saying here. So meditation will eventually lead a mortal human being to an immortal God, which is a reference I referred to last week. So that through states of meditation, we can tap into the unlimited universal mind, sometimes called the mind of God, God's mind. We hear God talking to us. This is in stillness, in deep stillness. We'll hear messages clearly, or recognition of what we're doing, and acknowledgements, and all sorts of things like that. It'll present clearly, and with such certainty and conviction, listeners, that you'll know that it's coming from the highest source possible. It couldn't possibly be from your own inner sort of limited self. And so with constant practice, the mind will eventually transcend to the very origin of thoughts. As your meditation strengthens, your body will eventually disappear. Likewise, your mental, emotional being, until there is only the self, arrived at through the timeless state of samadhi. So the deeper states of meditation are referred to as samadhi. And in that, you basically have got a almost 100% link with that higher aspect. All this culminates obviously in what we understand with terms like self-realization or enlightenment. But along the way, these are the benefits that are available for everyone listening. That's the end goal that I've just outlined, Jacqui. But along the way, the benefits to the meditator quickly become evident. For example, a great peace and calmness amongst family and friends and work and whatever. You're a calmer, more controlled being. And that's going to be very good for you, and will be very good for all the people you come in contact with. There'll be less stress in you. There'll be less tension, anger, impatience, intolerance, and so on. Now, there wouldn't be a person on the planet, Jacqui, that wouldn't aspire for that or wouldn't want that. They just don't know how to go about getting it. But meditation and the knowledge we've already accumulated, listeners, is how you bring it about. It doesn't just happen. We all have to work for these things. There'll be better off overall health. How we think and mentally and emotionally eventually will affect our health. And there's a lot of information and study done by medical people, and most people would realise that. So we've got to start at the core, where all of that physical manifestation in us has a starting point in the mental and emotional level of the being. There's a greater ability to control our five senses. Instead of them running loose, we've got tight control on those five horses that are in the picture of the Gita. We end up making, because we're stiller in karma, and ego's pushed out aside, we make better decisions, better making decisions in all aspects of our life, in family life, work life, buying houses like this reference to your friend, and so on. Even if your life's good, in inverted commas, you're sort of sitting pretty cozy and all the rest of it, and you feel you have everything, again, in inverted commas, like mainly material possessions and so on. A feeling of incompleteness will descend on that person sooner or later. Because you can have all the wealth and fame and so on, but if you haven't got spiritual growth and within you and an awareness of that, that'll be what'll present a problem to the person. They won't know at the start, but they'll know that something's still missing. I've got money, I've got a house, I've got a family, I've got a wife, and got a nice job, but something's missing. Well, what it is, they'll eventually discover is that they're not working on their spiritual growth. And so that'll eventually trigger them to be at that crossroads situation and make a move in that direction. And it'll constantly nourish and strengthen you on your spiritual journey. So if you're already on this path, like all our listeners are, it'll give you encouragement and certainty in that to continue on. And you more and more become the observer, the eternal witness, rather than getting caught up in any drama, which is always egoic driven. If it's a drama, you put ego in front of it. There's no sattvic drama, higher drama. It's only on the lower egoic self. And it'll constantly nourish and strengthen you on your spiritual journey, which means it increases your level of sattva, which is one of the three gunas. Now, we haven't done much on the gunas yet. They're in a later chapter, but there's been some references to them. So at this point, I could just quickly add in, sattva is the finest energy within the human being. That's like your spiritual energy. And then you've got your guna of rajas. That's the movement of everything in the creation. So all the movement in your mind, all the movement in your physical body, all the movement in your emotions is all rajasic, and tamas is when we're not doing anything. So in meditation, we're in a sense tamasic because we've stopped movement in the mind and the emotions and the body. But on the main level, we're operating totally from sattva, the highest level that there is. But tamas is indolence and laziness and slothfulness and not doing much in your life and so on. So anyway, to finish off my little section here, Jacqui, before I hand over to you, but I'll just leave it with a lovely little quote here. Buddha was asked at one stage, what do you gain out of meditation? What do you get out of it? What do you gain? Someone was asking him, one of the monks probably, and he said to them, nothing. You don't gain anything. It's what you lose. So you lose the movement in your mind, the grasshopper mind, you lose all the agitations, all of that. That's what you get with meditation. So you don't gain anything, but by getting rid of the rubbish that's there, well, you gain actually the end result then is that you're operating from your highest divine level. All right, Jacqui, I'm sure you've got a few
Beautiful.
things you could say there.
Yes, there's a few key points, and I hope I can recall them all. Once I get speaking, sometimes I tend to lose my train of thought, but the three main points here I think I want to cover, and I'll try and retain awareness of each of them. The first one is that I think for beginners, often there's that awareness that when they hear a little bit about the benefits on offer, and you've just articulated them beautifully, people very quickly want that. Like that's attractive to a person new to the concept of meditation. But I think what often gets in the way is that people don't necessarily in the beginning want to actually make it the time to do the practice. So I think that's where for a lot of absolute, complete, true beginners, they kind of like what they hear and they want to move in that direction. But to have the discipline of saying, okay, I'm going to make this a daily practice for 10 or 20 minutes per day and do this as a regular thing, that can be a hurdle. So I think it's just useful to name it so that if you are a beginner tuning in and listening to this, the recognition that it is so worth being encouraged. It is so worth just thinking, okay, those benefits are so beautiful. And I know if we could package them up in a bottle, everyone would say, give me some of that. But it takes discipline and strength to actually make the conviction, the commitment to the path of I am going to make some time on a regular basis and attempt to do this. So please be encouraged. It is worth the effort. The second point I wanted to make is that I think like your list is so beautiful. Again, I just feel so heartened hearing someone explain it and articulate it so clearly and so beautifully. But I know from years and years of teaching true beginners meditation that people love that, but they often come to think that it's on offer immediately, which it is and it can be. But I think often there is a sort of an in-between phase in that when people first begin to practice, what they are met with when they sit still and close their eyes is the absolute scramble of thoughts, the chaos of the mind, the heightened emotions. And that in the beginning, that is an absolute confrontational shock to a lot of people. They are so confronted with the noise that is happening inside. And I have seen many times that people at that point will not persist very long and actually just step away from the practice. Like, I thought this was supposed to offer me beauty, stillness, peace, clarity. And actually, all I'm met with is pain and frustration and noise and chaos that I don't have any capacity or seeming capacity to have any change over. And again, people often will step back and let their initial practice go at that point. So if that is you and if you fall into that category, again, like be heartily encouraged that that is a really common initial first steps of this journey, that sometimes we are met with what's in, and if we actually just can persist long enough, they will eventually, the thoughts, the activity, that will subside, and it is possible to then start to move through that and start to touch upon those moments of stillness, peace, bliss, all of this. But it comes gradually. So please know that we've all been there. Anyone who has a meditation practice has had time where they've met and been confronted by what's happening within. So be encouraged. Stillness and peace does come. It can just take a little bit to work through. Now, gee, I had one third point, and here's where I probably should have a notepad and be writing it down because at the moment it eludes me, but I will just trust that it'll come back at some other point. So I'll revert back to you now. You go on, and I'm sure I'll have
Yeah,
something else to say later on.
yeah, I'm sure it'll come back. These things happen. You get on a roll with one or two, and then you tend to forget. All my students will testify that I fall into that category frequently. Everything you said, Jacqui, is 100% true. 100% true. I'll just quickly share an example, from my own journey in that regard. When I first started my journey, it was through taking on the practice of meditation. That was my beginning point. I sort of bypassed these 5 lead-up points that are in the Gita, but I'd say I'm a bit rare in that regard, and probably made my journey a little bit more difficult. But that was where I was, and I was recognizing that mentally, not so much emotionally, that's not a sort of a real area of my mind, but constantly thinking, never rest in my mind for nearly 45 odd years, driven, always motivated, always chasing worldly things, all that sort of stuff, which is valid, but I was probably like in many cases overdoing it. And so I was realizing I was getting short-tempered and irritable, and would sort of lash out verbally and so on. So a good friend of mine, if you're listening, Rick, thank you very much, introduced me to the idea. He didn't mention it as meditation because he knew that it frightened me. I wouldn't go. But he sort of disguised it as a relaxation technique. There's a number, ring these people and they'll chat to you and outline a program. It'll help you relax in that. And what I desperately knew I needed was relaxation. So I rang the number and spoke to a lovely man, and he was very welcoming, and answered my questions and whatever, and told me that I could come to an hour-long meeting, like a free meeting. And when I got there, he started to show me figures and statistics and that on the practice of meditation. And that was the first time I realized, that he's talking meditation. And I always thought, no, I'm not going to meditate. I don't need meditation. That's for other people. Anyway, he did a terrific job on me, totally convinced me within that 60 minutes that I signed up to be there the following week. Following week, Jackie, and you'd remember that you were part of all that. You were only about 16 at that stage, and that was your sort of introduction to it as well. But I signed up and went along next week to be initiated into what's known as Transcendental Meditation, trademark TM. It's a worldwide sort of organisation. They're beautiful people, and that was a turning point in my life. Now, the point I wanted to come to was you talking about how we have these countless thoughts and you want to give up and all the rest of it. So, okay, I was instructed to meditate twice a day for 30 minutes, in the morning and in the evening. I was like most of our listeners, flat chat with work and doing things and all sorts of stuff, never had the time. But I somehow knew, and so I did discipline myself. So almost without fail, out of the 14 sessions, 7 times 2 is 14, I would invariably do at least a dozen, maybe sometimes even the 14. But there was constant movement in the mind. There were constant thoughts, Jackie. I couldn't get any stillness. And I remember one day getting quite angry with myself. The 30 minutes was up, and I said to myself, you were just thinking all that 30 minutes. There was no stillness. You were thinking all that 30 minutes. So you're going to sit down now and do another 30 minutes, and this time you're going to have a still mind. Well, what do you reckon happened? It nearly blew my head apart.
I've never heard this story.
This is the time to share it. I've shared it with other groups because this is a universal problem with everyone that starts meditation. Yeah, and I've got a lot of material here, and we'll cover that. So don't you or anyone else be worried. But I'm just sharing this example, folks, for you to all understand. If you've already gone through that yourself, and you know exactly what Jackie and I have just been saying. If you haven't, well, this is what's ahead of you. Yeah, so pre-warned is pre-armed. Anyway, to cut the story, to finish the story, I felt I kept thinking for over a year, 12 months, close enough to probably 15 months, that all I could recognise at the end of the session was that there was constant movement in the mind. But I was unaware, and in hindsight, with more knowledge and understanding of it, I do realise that there would have been some moments, and they're precious, but they all build up eventually and become stronger within you. But that was a process I didn't know was taking place. But anyway, after about 15 months or so, I started to have some meditations, and at the end of them, just simply thought, geez, I think I've had a lot of stillness in these meditations, lately. And then I sort of, when I became aware, I reflected back on that a bit, and I realised, well, I think that's been happening for maybe 5 or 6 months now, but it wasn't clear. And the ego was obviously still trying to have me focus on the bits when there was still a fair bit of activity taking place. But it was at that point that finally my mind fell still. And I made reference that we have direct communication, or can receive direct communication. And I mentioned this, I think, in my earlier podcast, but without this reference to the meditation. But after about the 15-month mark, there was enough stillness there one evening where I heard some words clearly. There was no other chatter there, total silence. And the words I heard were, I can't believe that this is all there is to life. And it was like a light bulb went on. This is like the crossroads in your life. Instantly, I knew, Jacqui and listeners, that no, this couldn't be. And I had 12 acres. I had a lovely wife. I had 2 lovely children. I had a good job as a teacher. I was well liked. I was good at sport. Everything was rosy in my life. And yet I'm hearing this sentence, I can't believe this is all there is to life. And this is before I knew anything about meditation, no study, no knowledge, no nothing. I just heard those words. But at the same moment, following that, in the next moment, I had an instant knowledge or knowing that no, well, I accept that this isn't all there is to my life, but I know there's going to be something else. And I knew instantly that all I had to do was look around, have the courage and follow whatever prompt came. And within a week, I've mentioned this on an earlier podcast, if you recall, Jacqui, within a week, I was on a mad hunt. I was going to groups, I was seeing teachers, I was doing anything I could to fill this void, which I referred to last week when Hermes said nothing in the creation can be empty. There has to be filled with something else. So what I realise now in hindsight, it wasn't crystal clear at that stage by any means, listeners, you'll get these events happening and you won't have much sort of true knowledge of it, but it'll develop, or you'll meet people that you can share it with, and they'll help you understand it. But that was the big turning point in my life, and now doing what I'm doing. So yeah, what we're discussing simply, folk, is in initial stages. If you've already meditated and you got it under control, you would relate to what's happening, what we're discussing. And if you're in the early stages, well, this is what invariably lies for every people.
Yes.
You mentioned some key words, Jacqui: perseverance, conviction, courage, all of that. You're going to have to draw on every ounce of that you've got within you it's the ego that's wanting to deter you from meditating. It'll say you haven't got time. You've got to spend more time with the children. You've got to get to work, whatever. Well, you do have to get to work, but what you've got to do is get up a bit earlier. You've got to make the time. Now that sounds, oh yeah, well that's easy. Oh yeah, I'll make the time. And it's like saying I'm going to go to gym and or I'm going to go on a diet. But after you've eaten lettuce leaves for a week, well then you say, oh no, this is too hard. I'm going back to fish and chips or hamburgers. So it's an important part of the teachings, and that's why I was saying that the accumulated knowledge that all the listeners have got through listening to. I didn't have that knowledge, so I was sort of, if you like, a backward child trying to make up. But boy, I sort of feel I made up. I put a lot of effort into my work after that. But that's the beautiful benefit, that when we're still, we receive these messages. So just on that, if any of you have had, any of our listeners have had spiritual experiences, some are regarded as sort of not so enormous. Others you say, oh, that one nearly took me into the fairyland. So they'll have degrees of them, but until a person's had a spiritual experience, no matter how brief or whatever, when there's certainty that it's a high connection, that they won't know what a spiritual experience is. It's like trying to tell a man what it's like having a baby, or even a woman that hasn't had a baby. Till you've had a baby, you don't know what it's like having a baby. So until you've had a spiritual experience, you don't understand what a spiritual experience is. You can talk about it, read about it, hear about it, but you don't really know what it is. Once you have your first spiritual experience, well, then that'll really spur you on. And you've got to be careful, because there's a trap there. You say, oh, I'm going to sit down and meditate because I want a spiritual experience. Well, as soon as you've said that, anyone, you can guarantee yourself you're not going to have a spiritual experience. Yeah, it's got to be spontaneous. But you know that is what will happen if you continue on the path of meditation. All right, Jacqui?
Just one other point here that I feel might be really useful to our listeners is meditation apps, there are so many, and it's a question I'm so commonly asked. Which ones do I recommend? What do I refer? Which ones do I utilize? The short answer is, I learned to meditate, as Dad said, when I was 16. Apps didn't exist. There was no way to learn meditation except someone teach you a technique and you practice. Now, I think in these busy modern times, if you're just sort of at the very beginning of your journey, apps do potentially have a place. They can be useful. Like, for instance, you can practice while you're on public transport going to work. You can be listening to a guided meditation. Now, I could talk about this for a long time, but I'm going to keep it really short because I know we've got other points to cover. But in truth, if I could really just succinctly explain my perception or my how I interpret apps is they're perhaps good at a very beginner level in the short term, but in truth, I don't really recommend them. I think that actually there's far more benefit in you learning a technique, you taking the time to practice it for yourself, because in a way, listening to something guided, you're more a passive component to something else. Whereas when you learn to practice a technique for yourself, you're really strengthening your inner capacity. Like, you're in charge, you're in control. You have something that you're practicing, and if you're observing, you're noticing when you deviate from that practice and when you pull yourself back. Like, you're strengthening your mental muscle and you're strengthening all of your capacity every time you realize something else is happening and you're coming back to what it is you're wanting to do. So in that sense, the long-term benefits are far greater if you learn to practice on your own. So if you're sort of sitting there thinking, oh, I've thought about apps and I might download a few, I'm a beginner, I'm going to get started, I'd actually say I personally wouldn't go down that path to begin with. If you're really short on time and you can do it on the train and that sort of thing, and that is your only option at this point, may be useful for a little bit, but don't ever think that meditating alongside a guided, someone else's guided experience is going to offer you the long-term benefit that we're talking about here. What we're talking about here is learning to do something for yourself so that you are in control, you're watching your mind, you're bringing it back to steadiness, and that then you're open to some of these experiences that we've been talking about and that Michael has just articulated so beautifully. So that's my 2 cents at this point on apps and their usefulness. All right, over to you, Michael, for the next step.
Um, Again, everything you've said, and I was just seeing if I can. Here it is. I found a couple of lines here. Everything you've said, Jacqui, is I concur wholeheartedly. You probably didn't notice, but I was nodding and shaking my head as you were saying the positive and negative things. I'll just read what I've written in my notes, and then just we'll wind it up sort of in that sense. So I've got a little subheading here called Some Practical and Useful Tips for Meditation, which is I've sort of put together from any of the great masters into a sort of a brief general summary. And I talk about the physical setting for your meditations. And, we don't have to stick to the root order that they're in here. So seeing as you've raised it, we'll deal with it now. So I talk about the physical setting for meditation. So first point I've got is all the masters say, you need a quiet room in your house set aside that you're going to use. And you need a good chair, a comfortable chair. Preferably not a lounge chair, but something that you're comfortable in, that's got a back and upright and so on. Or some people, especially the younger ones, with yoga and Tai Chi and that, they're supple enough. I couldn't do it, but sitting on a cushion with your legs crossed and back upright. It's important to have the back upright as you can, but I stress, make sure that there's no physical. Some people have got weaker backs or older people and so on. So you don't want any strain or tension in the body. Otherwise, it defeats the purpose of meditation. Your mind's going to go on my back or my neck or whatever. So it has to be comfortable. But where possible, you try and have the back straight so it lines up with the chakras being in a straight line, so that what's called the universal energy can flow through those 7 stages. So I mentioned sit as upright as possible, but without strain or tension. And then I've got what you're referring to, Jacqui, music, chants, hymns, meditation music, and so on. These guided meditations, incense, candles, can set up a calm atmosphere or mood. guided meditation can be useful, particularly in the early stages. So I'm saying exactly the same as you are, Jacqui. Yeah. But a group meditation can greatly raise the sattvic level, energy level in the room. So we know that if you've been, you've been on retreat, Jacqui, where 10, 15, 20 people meditate. In our classes, we always start off with a 20-minute meditation session, and everyone recognises, like we've got a dozen of us in the Wednesday morning group, that there's a greater stillness within the being, and that's because everyone's doing it jointly, so that energy that's within the room, raised by each individual, magnifies. It's how it works, and it's how it's meant to work. But nevertheless, we can generate our own. But I'm with you 100%, Jacqui, that any of those aspects of listening to tapes and guided meditations and that can be very helpful, particularly for beginners to have the encouragement and support of a sort of an outside aid, if you like. But eventually, you will find yourself that you won't need that anymore. You won't use those because they've served their function. They've got you sort of into a zone or into a habit or into a routine. In the end, the aim, as I understand it, Jacqui, and from my own experience, is that there's only two beings you want in that room, and that's your higher self and the higher self of the Lord or God. So we're wanting that union between those two aspects. And the more we start having those connections, the less we realise that the other that used to be of help is actually sort of, in a way, an interference. It's sort of a blockage. You're relying on another source to do what you're meant to do. So, be clear what I'm saying, listeners. Especially for people beginning, I'm very supportive of you using any of these sorts of techniques that you find useful. But I'm also making very clear that it's like a crutch. I'm going in to have a knee surgery done in a few days' time, Jacqui, so I won't be seeing you for a while. But don't worry, listeners, we've pre-recorded some, so you'll still be getting your nourishment each week. But I'll probably be on crutches for a while. That's to take pressure off the leg. But the doctors have already said to me, get rid of those crutches as soon as you feel comfortable and safe on walking. They want the emphasis back on your true leg, your real leg. The crutches are only pretend legs, aren't they? When or a walking stick or whatever, or Zimmer frame or whatever. So you need them when you need them, but when you don't need them anymore, like painkillers, I'm going to be on painkillers. I'll need them. They tell me it's a pretty painful operation, and I'm happy to take them. But I'm also be very happy when I don't have to take them. I know that there's a problem with drugs, even like medicinal drugs that are useful, that they can be a problem if you get addicted to them. So that's using that analogy of the crutch or a walking stick, is that your guided meditations, all those are like a crutch or a meditation. You're not strong enough yet to do it yourself, but as soon as you are strong enough and can do it yourself, and the quicker you do it, I would advise, the better for you. Get rid of your crutch in this area as quick as you can. Does that make sense, Jacqui?
It does indeed.
And I'm not shouldn't be saying, does that make sense? That's what I usually say when I'm presenting material. Can you see that I'm 100% in agreement with what you're saying? You summed it up, and we're sort of doubling up in a sense. But I thought
it's
it might
useful to
be.
hear different language, isn't it? Different language, different terminology, ways of saying similar things. I'm conscious of the time, but I just quickly thought of two things I wanted
Yes.
to add in, and then I'm going to hand over to you for sort of wrapping up comments. But again, for beginners, I'm just thinking, we all have iPhones or smartphones or something that we sort of plug in and recharge. In a way, just to get a very basic sentiment, it's like it's like we're the phone and we're plugging into the charging source. Like that is in essence a really simple everyday way to think of what the benefits meditation can bring. It's like plugging into the mothership, plugging into the source of all energy that's going to charge, the device, us in that sense. Another way, if you've got kids and if they've ever played those games like Xbox and things like that, if you've seen games where you've got the wands, the little tools, devices that you hold in your hand, and they've got to connect with the TV or the Xbox to, to calibrate so that these wands that you hold can talk with the game on the screen. That's another way to think of the beautiful universal alignment that can come when you're meditating and connecting to the source. You're calibrating to something in order that there's a line of connection, a line of communication to something far greater than yourself. So there's just two other little everyday snippets that might come in handy for people. But Michael, over to you. What else is imperative that we should get through from your notes today?
I think we've done about as much as we're going to do today, Jacqui. But it solves the problem of the next podcast. I've got it all here. We're just going to continue on with this material. We got through, for your information, the listeners, we got through one page. But that's all right. That's all right. This is meant to be what it is. And I'm sure the listeners, that these couple of points that we have covered, 2 or 3 points, whatever, are important, and they need to be understood clearly, and we're doing that. All I do now, Jacqui, is simply give an exercise for the week, and I haven't actually, devised one. In that sense. But, both this week and next week, again, obviously, I try to do them to deal with the topic. So it's going to deal with meditation. So all I'd ask you to do, listeners, as your exercise for this week, if you're already pretty much established in meditation, and you've got a mantra, or you've been taught the techniques and stuff like that, but you're a bit wayward in your hit and miss sort of situation, well, for you, the full focus would simply be try and get a key component of meditation is to try and practice twice a day, usually at sunrise and sunset. That's not always possible with our working lives and time you've got to be at work and whatever. But nevertheless, morning and evening are the 2 recommended times, and you have to work that out, which suits your schedule, where you can fit in. For those who are, so the more established ones, try and get that continuity. Try and make sure that you make time to meditate morning and evening every day. Sometimes we're sick, sometimes something really urgent, but try and not let ego present opportunities to sort of miss out on it. And for the ones that are very new to it or haven't even started, well, I'd simply just suggest to you, start sitting still in a chair for 10 minutes, eyes closed, be as relaxed as you can, and just watch the movement that's taking place in your mind. Try not to engage with the conversations. They want you to talk to them like as if they're a human being, and asking you questions or posing something to you, and getting your response. So mentally you talk backwards and forwards. This is the chattering monkey mind. So just be observant for this week of how much movement there is, and try and just at least shut it out by not engaging in it. Don't worry, don't try and stop them. You can't stop them. It's like the tide coming in and out. But don't play with them. Don't acknowledge them. Don't discuss with them. Try. So that would be enough practice for anyone this week. And next week, when we do the podcast, I'll give a more focused sort of response to the whole topic of the meditation. All right, Jacqui. So
Beautiful. I mean,
gonna,
that's very clear and substantial what you've just offered and suggested there. But I see we've got a lot to say, and I mean these are big things. When I teach a beginner's meditation course, it's 8 weeks of a minimum of 1 hour, so 8 hours just on introduction to meditation. So these are big topics, really, really big topics. We're doing very well. I think we covered an immense amount actually in this one episode. So we're doing well with the time sort of constraints we're working to.
And this chapter, like as I say, they're all important, but it's important because it's got such far-reaching implications. the long term of eventual realization, but also the short term, the instant sort of reward of a more contented sort of being. But there's a lot that goes in it, as you say, the perseverance, the understanding, the why you're doing it, why not just not worry about it? Like I'm busy and I've just got to get on with life. Well, if you're busy and you've got to get on with life, well, get on with life. But eventually the business of life will do the same to you as it did to me. You'll call out help. My life's too busy and it's doing me in. And you'll want relief in some stillness. So I'll call it the panacea, listeners. It's a cure-all. Panacea means cure-all. If the medical people could put that into a jar of pills, they could sell them for $1,000 bottle of 100 pills or something. You're going to be more relaxed. You're going to be happier. You're going to be more content. You're going to be more everything. Well, who wouldn't buy that? But God will make it, Jacqui and listeners, that no medical people will ever achieve that. Because he says, if you want to cure your problems, which you've brought on upon yourself, you need to use the right technique to get to cure those problems. And one of his main remedies that he recommends, Lord Brahman, Krishna, God, is meditation, stillness. Stillness of the mind, stillness of the emotions, stillness of the physical body. All right, Jacqui, that's my parting
Beautiful.
words.
They're lovely parting words. We will leave it at that. Goodbye,
Okay.
everybody.
Goodbye.